Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you a book review of Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon Lee. So just as a disclaimer before starting this video, while I did actually read this copy of Phoenix Extravagant, which is the Goldsboro Books edition, I was in the spring sent a proof copy of this book by the publisher for review. So that doesn't influence my reading of the book whatsoever or my opinions on this book. This is also going to be a spoiler-free review. So Phoenix Extravagant was one of the books that was meant to publish earlier in the year, I think in May. However, it's one of the ones that has been pushed back due to COVID. So I believe this book comes out in August in the UK. I happen to have this edition because it was part of the Goldsboro Books SFF Book of the Month Club, and I was looking forward to it because I've read Nine Fox Gambit, which is Yoon Lee's, I believe, debut novel, which is a sci-fi book, which I really enjoyed, but like, I did not absorb a single thing from that book. It is so complex and complicated, and I couldn't go on with the series despite the fact that I really enjoyed the first book. It's a weird one. So knowing that he was writing a fantasy book was very, very exciting for me, and I decided to give it a try, especially after hearing that my friend Rachel from the Shades of Orange booktube channel really loved this book. I took a stab at it while I was kind of in the middle of, I wouldn't say a full-on reading slump, but sort of teetering on the edge of a reading slump, and it saved my reading. I loved this book so much, and although I loved it, I can definitely see it being a bit of a Marmite book, so let's get into it. Phoenix Extravagant takes place in a city that has been conquered and is being occupied by an outside force called the Razani. And our main character, Jebi, is an artist and is sort of struggling to make ends meet and decides that they are going to go ahead and apply for a job with one of the ministries that is recruiting artists. So they go ahead and they take the test and don't end up getting that job. However, they end up being hired for a different ministry, the Ministry of Armor. And essentially their job is to paint the sort of grammar and sigils onto masks that bring these automata to life that are basically kind of like a policing force for the occupiers. So they take the job, much to the dismay of their sister, whose wife was killed when the Razani came in and initially took over, and their life kind of takes this big turn. So they discover some things, some secrets about the government and about this occupying force, and they decide that they are going to rebel in their own way. So there's a lot to love about this book. I particularly enjoyed the world building. It's a little bit lighter than I would have expected for sort of a world that had the potential to be so incredibly kind of rich and saturated in world building. However, I think you really get enough, and I think a lot of that has to do with, don't quote me on this, I didn't go ahead and look this up and see if Yoon Lee talked about this in interviews, but you really get the sense that the sort of nation that Jebi is from is sort of like a fantasy version of Korea, and the Razani, who are the occupiers, are Japan, Imperial Japan. And so a lot of that really comes through, and I felt like that did a lot of favors to the world building. I really enjoyed the world building, even though it was a lighter touch. The stuff that we did get was really cool. So for example, the automata that sort of patrol are these sort of creepy, faceless, robot-like creatures, which were really awesome. And I really loved all of kind of the ministries, and I loved the sort of the people who are struggling under the force of this occupying nation that is trying to erase their culture and their history. And that is what I thought was really, really interesting about this book. It has a lot to say about the erasure of culture, particularly art and artistry. And I don't want to go into it too much, but that is one of the main themes of the book, and I thought that was a really, really interesting and cool thing to feature in a fantasy novel, and to have the hero being an artist. I read a ton of fantasy, as you guys know, and I love the genre, and it's something that I do enjoy about the genre is the fact that you do hit a lot of those same tropes, and it can sometimes feel a little bit samey, but sometimes that starts to send me on the edge of a little bit of a reading slump. As I mentioned, that was the place that I was kind of in when I started Phoenix Extravagant. And I think one of the reasons that this resonated so well with me at this particular time is the fact that it feels like a breath of fresh air. It felt so incredibly different. It almost feels like it had a lot of sort of the beats of like an anime story, but in a novel, and not kind of written as an anime at all. It feels very much like it is firmly a fantasy novel, but it just felt so wonderfully different, and I really appreciated that. I also love the fact that I feel like you really get the sense that Yoon Lee had the time of his life writing this book. I feel like he must have had so much fun with this, because although it does touch on a lot of darker themes, especially, as I say, with that kind of cultural erasure, a lot of the dialogue is very funny, and our main character is very much not your standard fantasy hero. They are an artist. They don't want to be a revolutionary. They don't want to change the world, they just want to paint, but they kind of end up getting sucked into this situation where they have to do something. But at the same time, although they have these moments of doing these brave things and kind of, you know, thinking for other people and not necessarily themselves, they're super bumbling, and they are a little bit silly, especially in some of the dialogue, in some of the communications, particularly with another character who I won't mention yet. I just absolutely adored them. I thought they were so fun, and such a, not an anti-hero in the sense that we think of, but just like not what you would imagine the hero of a fantasy book being. Their love interest, V, who is a duelist for the Razani, she is amazing. She is badass. She is a fighter, a swordswoman. She has this amazing backstory. She's super brave and super stoic, and she's the person that you would have imagined as the hero of the story. And I love the fact that we went with this kind of bumbling artist instead. I thought that that made this into a very, very different book, and that is one of the things that really made it feel so refreshing. Kind of carrying on from that, I really loved the characters in this book. I felt like all of them had a really, really strong backstory. Jebi in particular has a very, very strong voice, and I thought that the kind of chemistry between all the characters is really wonderful, regardless of whether it's sort of romantic relationships and feelings, or friendships, or you know, antagonistic relationships. I really, really adored that. I also really liked the sibling relationship in this book. It's fascinating, and it's not really something that I think I've seen very much of. And I don't want to say too much about that because, again, it'll be spoilery, but I thought that their sister Bonsunga is a fascinating character, and I would love to like read a novella about her or something like that. I thought that she was just really interesting, and their sort of relationship and their changing dynamics from page one are really fascinating. And just as one last really quick note, this is a very, very LGBTQ friendly book. Our main character is non-binary. It is never a problem throughout the book. No one misgenders them. It never comes up as like an issue. You kind of get the sense that it's a very sort of accepted thing in the society. Their sister was married to another woman. There is a polyamorous relationship in this book between side characters. It's a very, very open kind of world, and characters' sexuality is just never, sexuality and gender identity never comes up as a problem, and I know that that is something that a lot of people are looking for in books. There's a lot that I left out of this because I didn't want to spoil some of my absolute favorite parts. There's a particular character in this book who I just love with all of my heart and soul, but I don't want to mention. So I would love to talk about this book with you if you have managed to read it early, or when the book comes out and you guys manage to get your hands on it. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really loved it. I just had so much fun reading this. It was a breath of fresh air. I would read it again and again and again if I could. I would read a million things set in this world. It does seem like it's a standalone. at the moment, but it definitely leaves the door open for a sequel, so fingers crossed we either get a direct sequel or we get a companion novel, because I thought this was just great. I can see it being a hit or miss book for some people because of maybe some of the world building and some of the writing style. I found the writing style to be much more accessible than his previous books though. So if you've read Nine Fox Gambit and you're worried about that, I don't think you need to worry about that with this one. So that is it for my review of Phoenix Extravagant. I would love to hear if it's a book that you've managed to read already, what you thought of it, if it's in your TBR, or if it's something that you've not heard of before. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.